A while back we did a video about the personal belongings of a Dutch soldier during the second half of the 8 Years' War in the beginning of the 17th century. The link for that video is in the description below, but I also want to do a video about the personal belongings of a Dutch sailor in the 17th century. This also bleeds over into the 18th century for a little bit. This will not be a comprehensive list of everything a sailor could have with him, but I tried to come as close as possible within the means and the sources that I had. I'm going to show a lot of items. Not all sailors would have had these items, some would have had more, some would have had less. But this is just trying to give a broad overview of the personal belongings that a relatively well-to-do sailor could have with him. I will not cover the bedding of the sailors, since I've already covered that in another video. That link is also down in the video description. I will not cover weapons, since most sailors wouldn't have had weapons that belong to themselves, apart from pirates and some privateers. Weapons on most merchant ships would have been brought out by the constable when it was needed, and a percentage of the crew would have been equipped with those weapons. I will also not be covering any specific tools for any specific jobs aboard a ship. For instance, tools for a carpenter or sailmaker or anything like that. This is just going to be a list of basic things that almost any sailor could have had with them. Sea chests could vary widely in size and shape. It often depended on how much stuff the sailor would need. They could have a round lid or a flat lid. The thing with round lids is that you can't stack other chests on top of that chest, so your chest would always be the one on top. The Dutch East India Company standardized the shapes and sizes of chests that were allowed to be brought on board of their ships. This was done to be able to store all the chests as efficiently as possible. From my research within the standardized VUC sizes, these seem to have been the most common dimensions found for sea chests for Dutch sailors. Officers were allowed to bring multiple chests, and they were also often larger, often these dimensions. And officers could also buy additional cargo space for any extra things they would wanted to bring with them. They had to pay at the beginning of the voyage and at the end. There seems to be a myth that sea chests wouldn't have had locks, since a sailor should have been able to trust all the other crewmen aboard the ship. From the historical sources, I have to conclude that this is false. At least in the Netherlands, most Dutch sailors' sea chests had locks. This was to prevent theft, but even then, with the locks, chests were often broken open and items were stolen from those chests. And as you can see, my chest is a flat top. It doesn't have a lock. I might be able to install that at a later date. It has metal hand grips on the sides. I haven't seen any historical evidence for the ornate ropework handles that you see in later periods. And my sea chest has these dimensions. And if we open up the chest, you'll see it has one large compartment and two smaller compartments for smaller items that need to be easier to reach. Most sailors would have had some extra clothes with them in their chests. For instance, most common is an extra linen shirt. Like most people from the lower classes, sailors had shirts with relatively short collars. Most of these shirts were white. Some sailors from the East Indies bought cotton in the East Indies and made a shirt out of them, or had shirts made out of them. We also see jackets. This is a jacket that you've seen me wear in other videos. This is called a walhemd, and this is an evolution of the woolen shirt I'm wearing underneath the bows. This one, as you can see, has lacing of the sides. You've seen similar garments in Tom's video about the personal belongings of a soldier, where he has that, where he has this garment in his pack, and this is the evolution of that, but with buttons all the way up the front. The difference between a normal jacket and the walhemd is that it's worn with the bottom of the jacket inside the pants. That's why it's often this, and also this, is often referred to in the sources as a woolen shirt. We also see extra pairs of breeches or trousers. These are just your normal early 17th century trousers or breeches, however you like to call them. Then we have the slouch cap. I already mentioned these in our video about the Trump cap. These are unstiffened wool felt hats that could just be thrown in a sea chest, and you could just forget about them until you went on land and needed some protection against the sun. So we don't see them with sailors working on board ships, but we do see them in harbour towns, harbours, and with sailors just on land. Then we also have a knitted cap. Because you can always lose the knitted cap you have, or the thermal cap, or whatever you wear in your head. So it's always good to have a spare. Then we have two pairs of extra socks, stockings or hose, as some people call them. Some sailors would have brought shoes, and others would have brought clogs. The thing with clogs is they're not really suitable for work on board of the ship, but they're good to walk on land. In colder climates, leather shoes tend to get really hard and tough, and clogs are already as hard as wood. So they're really more comfortable to walk on than frozen leather shoes. A lot of sailors brought some extra food and drink with them. When it comes to food, these were often preserved. Think of smoked, dried or cured meats. Also smoked cheeses, and on some ships the sailors would get about this size, 2 cheeses of about this size, and they had to make them last the whole voyage. On most ships it was forbidden to keep rations back and store them for later, but it was allowed to bring your own snacks. When it comes to drinks, we often see that sailors brought bottles or even barrels of brandy, moutwijn or jenever. When coming back from the east, sailors often brought arak. If you want to see examples of these drinks, we have made 2 videos about drinks in the 17th century. In the second video of that series, I show both brandy, moutwijn and jenever, and it's also in the video description down below. They mostly ate from wooden bowls. With some companies like the Dutch VOC, they provided wooden bowls for the sailors. With other independent skippers or with other companies, it would be customary for the sailors to provide their own bowls. So with some of these companies or skippers, it would be advantageous for the sailor to have 1 or 2 bowls in a sea chest. We often find short spoons, or spoons with a short stem, but some sailors would carry multiple spoons in their chest, just if one broke or one got lost or anything. Most sailors drank from earthenware vessels. This could mean jugs, cups or tankards. Pewter was available at the time, but would have been rather expensive for the normal sailor. But then again, there's also an account of a sailor using a silver spoon, but at the time this would have been seen as noteworthy. Some would have brought towels. These are 3 linen towels, 2 small ones and 1 big one. They could have also used fabric scraps from either wool scraps or linen scraps for the same purpose, just to be able to dry off when you come below decks in the forever moist environment of a 17th century ship. I also have a bar of soap. This soap is made from olive oil and would have been available at the time, but it would have been on the higher end of the spectrum of 17th century soaps. Most soaps that people would have been able to buy would have been made from animal fat. Soap like this wouldn't be used to wash yourself, but most often would be used to wash clothing. Then I have a small comb. Combs exactly like this one have been found a lot on Dutch shipwrecks from the 17th century. It was important to just comb out your hairs to minimize the existence of lice. So combing was an essential part of general hygiene for a lot of people at the time. Aboard Dutch 17th century ships, the workload was divided into shifts. This meant that there was always a percentage of the crew that didn't have to work, and they had to entertain themselves in their downtime. For many of them, this just meant sleeping the time away. Others entertained themselves with other means. For these sailors, fishing was a popular pastime, since fishing meant they could catch some extra food. So some would have bought small, simple fishing kits. The only thing they would need was either to make a hand reel out of a piece of wood or a long piece of wood to make a fishing pole. The playing of games was encouraged. Gambling was strictly forbidden, but games like card games and dice games were not. That it was forbidden didn't mean it didn't happen. According to the sources, sailors often bet on the food and the drink they brought themselves. Board games were also very popular. Some captains would provide board games for their crews. Others would bring their own, or they would make their own. This, for instance, is a simple checkers game with core tiles made on a piece of sailcloth. Sailors often brought very large amounts of clay pipes and tobacco. I don't have any of those here. I only have a small tinderbox, that's all. I'm not a smoker myself, but I've made a video series about tobacco and smoking in the 17th century. Again, like all the other videos I'm mentioning here, a link to that one will be down in the description. And some sailors that were musically gifted would bring small instruments like flutes. I'm not musical myself, not at all, so the closest I could get to represent this was a small jaw harp. We see jaw harps a lot in the archaeological record. We also have 17th century images of them. They seem to have been relatively cheap instruments for people to buy at the time. The literacy rate in this period within the Netherlands seems to be higher than most people tend to think. This was about 25 to 35% of people could read. And within the city of Amsterdam in 1630, about 57% of men were able to read. And now we're taking a look at the maintenance items that a Dutch 17th century sailor could have had with them. While being away for months at sea, a sailor needed to be able to maintain his gear. So we often find extra fabric within the belongings of Dutch sailors. A peculiar thing with this fabric, if we find extra wool with a sailor, it's often made from the same exact cloth that the clothing of the sailor was already made of. So they often bought a jacket and bought extra wool from the same material as that jacket, so they could patch up the jacket with the same type of wool. Sometimes they would have extra leather scraps to mend shoes or mend knife sheaths or anything else like that. Some would bring sewing kits. What we do find with Dutch sailors from this period and the list of their belongings is that they often have scrap pieces of sailcloth. This could be used to repair mattresses or strengthen specific pieces of clothing. They often also had multiple spare knives with them, because when you lose a knife aboard your ship, it's really good to have some extra. And with the knives you also sometimes find sharpening stones, and if the knives are badly damaged, sometimes some sailors would have files. An interesting other point is that sailors would often have spare tool handles within their belongings. This could be also to repair a knife and refit a new handle to the knife. And to maintain the steel of the knives, the leather of the knife sheaths and the leather of their shoes sailors would sometimes have stuff like this. This is a mixture of beeswax and animal fat, pig's fat in this case. Some recipes will also add tar to make it last a bit longer. And this would keep the leather more supple and a little bit water resistant. Same goes for the blades of the knives, since this prevented rust from building up on the knives. Dutch sailors could receive their chests and the contents thereof from family members. They could also receive them from soul merchants or mediators, and they could also buy their chests and contents in harbour towns. I know that officers from the Dutch VOC received chests with the company logo branded on them. I don't know if this was the case for normal sailors. Sailors did often mark or brand their personal belongings with their personal mark to distinguish them from the other sailors. And I know an account of one lower VOC officer who didn't receive a sea chest when he came on board, and he had to share a sea chest with another lower officer. If a sailor died during the voyage, his belongings and chests would be brought up to the mainmast, where all his belongings would be displayed. Then all the items would be auctioned off to the rest of the crew. It was customary for the crew to bid high on these items and even overbid, because it was customary that all the profits from this auction would go to the family of the deceased sailor.